I debated back and forth about whether I actually wanted to do this, and I've decided that I do. Let's talk about Tim Burton. If you know the Burton aesthetic, you know it is very pale, very white, not very multicultural, united colors of Benetton, you know? A very similar aesthetic to your boy Robert Eggers. And we not in those either. So let's read the quote from 2016 from Bustle that made everybody feel a little bit funky. Nowadays, people are talking about it more, he says, regarding film diversity. But things either call for things or they don't. I remember back when I was a child watching the Brady Bunch and they started to get all politically correct. Like, okay, let's have an Asian child and a black. I used to get more offended by that than just... I grew up watching blaxploitation movies, right? And I said, that's great. I didn't go like, okay, there should be more white people in these movies. Now, what many of us were looking for was... I haven't really thought about it that much. I just kind of like hire whoever I think about. But, maybe I'll think about it. Maybe I'll do better. Maybe we were looking for that. But I want to step back for a second to October of 1968. At some point, George Romero read Richard Matheson's apocalyptic novel, I Am Legend. And he thought to himself, that situation looks really bad. I wonder what it would have looked like when it first started. And Night of the Living Dead was born. Principal photography started in July of 67 and the film released on October 1st, 1968. Now, if you're not familiar with Night of the Living Dead and you don't want me to spoil it for you, I'll put a marker here so you'll know where to fast forward to. So the film revolves around a group of people who have taken shelter in a farmhouse as a zombie apocalypse is developing around them. After a night of terror, everybody is deceased except for one dude named Ben who has managed to fend off all the zombies outside and all the people turning into zombies inside. He goes outside when the cavalry arrives to get help. The cavalry thinks he's a zombie, and they shoot him and burn him along with the other zombies. That may sound interesting enough, but it becomes even more interesting because Ben, the sole survivor who is eventually shot by the cavalry, is black. And it becomes even more interesting when you realize that this film came out in October of 1968. And Dr. King's assassination took place on April 4th, 1968. So Night of the Living Dead has been analyzed and celebrated for its commentary on systematic oppression of black people and how lumping us all in as one monolith allows them to take us out a lot easier. But the thing is, Dwayne Jones was only hired because he was the best guy for the job. The role was written for a white man. And George Romero decided not to go in and change any of the text to make him black because what's the point? The plot is the plot. So in this case, hiring Dwayne Jones changed the context of the film and made it more culturally significant, which was very helpful to the film. Now, while that was very helpful to George Romero, Tim Burton was born and raised in Burbank, California, one of the whitest areas you will ever find during the whitest time that you will ever know. And Tim Burton movies typically have one base idea. White people, when left to their own devices, tend to do really weird things, especially the outcasted and forgotten white people. If you're nice to the weirdos, they will generally be nice to you. But if not, it's not going to be pleasant for you. Be nice to the weirdos. It's my belief that he believes that once you put black people into those stories, they become about race and not about weirdos. You may hear sometimes things call for things and sometimes they don't and think that's not the thought process of a prolific director. And I would beg to differ because I think that one of my favorite directors also follows that thought process, but features black people prominently in his films. But every single black person in his films serve a specific purpose. And that director is Quentin Tarantino. Now, Quentin Tarantino has at least one black person featured prominently in all of his films except for one. And we'll get to that. The first film being Reservoir Dogs, Detective Holdaway, who's there only for one scene just to talk to his partner, Freddie, right? Now, it's established pretty early on, so this isn't really a spoiler, but he's undercover as Mr. Orange during this heist. This being Officer Freddie Neuendijk, Mr. Orange. So why do you need this one scene with this one black officer? Reservoir Dogs' Sundance premiere was in January of 92, and theatrical release was October of 92. LA riots, also known as the Rodney King riots, when racial tensions with the police were at an all-time high, happened in April of 92. So if I'm a director at that time, and my main character is a police officer, but I want people to be sympathetic to that character at this time, I'm gonna make his partner a black guy, so you know he not one of them. Not only that, but this is a film where your main characters are named Mr. White, Mr. Blonde, Orange, Mr. Pink, Mr. Blue, and Mr. Brown. Randy Brooks was previously known as playing Ron Delaney, the one guy who was trying to convince all of the gang members to live an honest life in the 1988 film Colors. Let's talk about Pulp Fiction. When casting Marcellus Wallace, Quentin Tarantino originally asked for Max Julian, like the Max Julian. That's one of the many blaxploitation films that Tarantino grew up watching. So the Mac is the coolest guy he knows. So with what happens to Marcellus Wallace at the end of Pulp Fiction, it's twice as bad because you would never picture that happening to the Mac. And Ving Rhames is also very reminiscent of Suge Knight, who was also a very popular figure in LA at the time. Sam Jackson, I'm pretty sure that Vince is black to give Jules cool points. Because you got to be a special kind of cool to take Mia Wallace away from Marcellus Wallace. You know what I'm saying? And the only way you get that kind of cool in the 90s is being around a black dude. And Marvin was supposed to be just another white guy in the apartment, but he was also supposed to get shot in the apartment with Brett as well. Quentin decided to move Marvin's death to the car so that the black guy's death could be an accident. Of course, Jackie Brown is an homage to blaxploitation films, so of course there's going to be black people in that. And I don't think I have to explain Django. And The Hateful Eight is basically a spinoff of Django. Kill Bill has two black characters. One being Vernita Green, and that's literally because a black girl was mentioned in the Fox Force 5 conversation during Pulp Fiction. And the other one is Sam Jackson as Rufus the piano player, for two reasons. Number one, the black musician or the black piano player is a very common trope. Shout out to Dooley Wilson. But also, he senses what's about to happen in the chapel and gets up and leaves before it happens, which is a common trope about black people. We just know when to leave the room. We know when it's time to go. In Glorious Bastards, Marcel is a black man who works with Shoshana and also is her lover. The most forbidden of loves, you know? And then there's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where you won't find really any black people. You know why? Because in terms of white Hollywood around this time, we weren't there, so it didn't call for us to be there. So black people are featured prominently in Tarantino works, but they typically serve a purpose, and they are homages to black people that Quentin Tarantino saw in his childhood on television and in movies. Well, I know Tim Burton watched TV. Why can't he just do an homage? He did. In the newest Beetlejuice film, one of the happiest places in the film and the way to the great beyond is the Soul Train. Which makes sense because they're escorting souls to the other side. And it's a very happy, dancey, excited place. The people said that was racist as well. They didn't like that. So do I wish Tim Burton could figure out a way to figure in more black people into his work? Yeah. Do I need it? Not really. That man just want to tell stories about weird white people. And as allegorical and metaphorical and as weird as his stories already are, I think he just wants to avoid people looking for more metaphors where there are none. Every day, I think how much more interesting the Wicked movie would have been if Glinda had been cast as a black woman. Because now, instead of Wicked being about systematic oppression, which affects more than one group of people, now it's just racism. So as a black woman, yes, it irritates me a lot. But as a person who loves film, points were made.